What's going on, everybody? This Afro think tank. Human beings have been absolutely terrible. We've been absolutely diabolical. Believe it or not, this is gonna sound very unbelievable, but at this current moment in time, human beings are the most peaceful we have ever been. Peaceful, meaning there are less human beings killing each other right now than there used to be in the past. All right, I know it's really hard to kind of picture that, but we are a much more violent species than we all like to admit, even though we are entertained by pure violence all the time, right? If you really think about it, what it is, the things that stimulate us, to entertain us, how we pass the time between being slaves or corporations, right? But to be honest, there are a lot of atrocities in history that were worse, much worse than the ones that you know. Like you got the genocide the Dutch committed in the Congo was much worse than the Holocaust. Like much worse, right? What the Dutch did to the South Africans and the Khoisan and all of them, much worse. Like much worse. Like Europeans and Asians are the worst. I mean, we're bad to Africans. We had our wars and stuff, and we have our atrocities. But, our atrocities over time, as we developed as humans, we developed, right? But those Europeans and those Asians who were coming from places that didn't have as much resources, right? Or they had a different cultural way of doing things, they were really barbaric, like especially the Europeans. The places that have the least resources, the people tend to be the most barbaric because they got to fight for the resources, right? So, I mean, when I'm talking about, if you were to study history, you would see that all of Eurasia was just a continuous cycle of killing themselves, right? Until just recently. So, but anyway, we're gonna learn about some of that history. If y'all interested, just understand we have been terrible. And hey, to be honest, most creatures on this planet are in perpetual war, right? Most creatures on this planet experience is one of perpetual war, in death and life, right? So as human beings, we have gotten ourselves as animals to the point to where we have leisure time. We can relax, like we have advanced to that point, so we should be proud of ourselves as multicellular organisms. But at the same time, we also participate in the rules of law of nature, and that's kill or be killed, only the strong survive, and adapt, overcome, or die, right? Right? You ain't no getting around those rules no matter how many human constructs you put around it. Anyway, you guys tell me what you think about this in the comment section. It's Afro Think Tank. Learn something, teach something. I'm out.
There are 7 instances that represent the true depth of human depravity, and I nearly lost my soul trying to research all this. Let me explain. First of all, you've been measuring human atrocity in the completely wrong way, especially modern day where people kind of just flatten atrocity with body count. They'll see a statement like Genghis Khan killed 40 million people, which isn't true by the way, or that the Crusaders killed 40,000 people in Jerusalem, and just based on the numbers can easily conclude, yeah, the Mongol event was way worse. But what does worse mean? We're talking about the human experience here. The number of dead doesn't tell you about the specific quality of their deaths, and that quality of their dying is where we can actually determine the real horror. Listen, in this journey and research, I'm going to be very methodical. Of course, we're keeping military Saxon massacres at the top of the list. Now within that, you need 4 variables that a simple body count can't capture. The first is the cultural intent of the attacker. Are they killing pragmatically just to clear the board? Think of the Mongols dividing people within cities and quickly killing them in order to prevent disease, all being done under the quota of the Great Khan. Or are they killing theatrically, to humiliate, to destroy the enemy's past and afterlife, and to turn whatever they find sacred into a desecrated joke? Now the second is the material of the tools. A Roman blade designed for a 2-inch thrust that's meant to puncture vital organs has a blood pressure drop that is fundamentally different than death from a blunted iron crusader broadsword, one that's been hacking through collarbones for 4 hours and has been shaved down to like a club. Now the third is the logistics and state of mind of the attackers. Practically speaking, are they fresh, well-fed, disciplined troops who are working in organized shifts? A lot like the Romans? Because that violence is completely different than the kind of violence from a starving, dysenteric, and hallucinating fanatic population. Especially if they're at the absolute metabolic limit of the human body. Now, the fourth is the five senses reality on the ground, like your human five senses. And it's gotta be a victim on the ground, not some bird's eye view of a general. And we can't use any retrospective judgment of any historians. We are focusing on reconstructing smell, sound, touch, and sight, along with the taste of the final hours of a human being experiencing this agony. And when we fully apply my 4 variables to human history, I believe we found 7 events that correspond with human depravity, ironically corresponding with the 7 deadly human sins. Buckle up, let's start. The first event is the peak of human theatrical generational sadism. I'm referring to Ashurbanipal's sack of Susa in 647 BC. This was after the heat of the battle, weeks after, when the Assyrian army had time, resources, and everything in the world, along with the specific baked-in cultural element of designing public torment. They wanted to spiritually and historically unmake Elam, destroy the present, past, and future simultaneously. See, in Mesopotamian theology, a spirit can only properly rest with proper burial and offers from the living. The Assyrians made a point to destroy the royal tombs and expose the bones to the sun, performing a calculated act of cosmic murder, in their worldview condemning the souls of the Elamite kings to eternal agonizing restlessness in the underworld. They forced the Elamite nobles to participate, handed heavy grinding stones, and forced to reduce their own ancestors' bones to dust, while Assyrian soldiers formed circles and laughed. It became an inescapable psychological horror for the Elamites. You are an instrument of your own culture's erasure, performing the act for the amusement of your greatest enemy. And Ashurbanipal did not hide it. He carved it into stone. And his words, let me just say them. The tombs of their earlier and later kings I destroyed. I devastated, I exposed to the sun. Their bones I carried off to Assyria. I laid restlessness upon their shades. I deprived them of food offerings and libations of water. I devastated the provinces of Elam. Salt I scattered over them. The noise of people, the tread of cattle and sheep, the glad shouts of rejoicing, I banished from its fields. Wild asses, gazelles, and all kinds of beasts on the plain, I caused to lie down among them, as if at their home. Ashurbanipal didn't merely kill the living. The dude murdered the dead, literally salted the earth, and made the entire land into a home for beasts. There is no other sack in antiquity that matches this combination of calculated slowness, extreme theological precision, and the turning of the victim as an executioner of their own heritage. In 612, when Nineveh fell, the capital of the Assyrians, it's probably the closest to that, but it's a volcanic detonation of rage. It's not that slow, calculated nature that the sack of Susa was. Planned, savored, and performed at leisure. The second tier represents the single worst bureaucratic crushing event. I'm referring to the Roman demolition of Carthage in 146 BC. What makes this especially horrific is that it was all done by procedure. The Romans had fought Carthage for over 100 years across 3 wars. By 146, the hatred was so deep and so cold that the Senate's instruction to Scipio Aemilianus was not to defeat Carthage, but Carthage should cease to exist. When Scipio breached the harbor walls after a multi-year siege, which starved the city of about 500,000 people, it wasn't a barbarian frenzy. That's what's scary. He deployed organized cohorts working in shifts, with Appian recording that 6 days and nights were consumed in this fighting. Soldiers working in shifts so that they wouldn't be worn by the toll, the slaughter, the lack of sleep. The Romans were rotating the killers the way a factory rotates workers, managing the calories used for murder the same way they'd build a road. And speaking of roads, according to Appian's account, who utilizes Polybius' testimony, who actually stood next to Scipio, the street cleaners were removing the rubbish with axes and making the roads passable, tossed with those instruments the dead and living together into holes in the ground, dragging them along like sticks, stones turning them over with their iron tools. Then there's a line that shows the sheer procedural indifference the Romans had to this. Trenches were filled with men. Some who were thrown with their head foremost and their legs sticking from the ground writhed a long time. Others fell with their feet downward and head above ground. Horses ran over them, crushing their faces and skulls in the headlong haste. These were living Carthaginian civilians, guys. Old men, women, and children included, thrown into ditches head first, legs kicking the air, suffocating slowly, while being crushed by cavalry horses whose riders couldn't even care that they were riding over them. If we're looking at the sensory reality of the victims here, It's the total absence of personal hatred. There's no screaming enemy looking at you in the eye, no religious ecstasy, just the rhythmic clatter of sandals, barking of bureaucratic orders, and the final impersonal weight of stone being dropped on you by men look at you as a landscape feature. It was so bad the wife of Carthaginian General Hasdrubal, who had surrendered to save himself, killed all her children and threw them into the fire along with herself, not wanting this fate. Now strap in for number 3, because we're going into what I call the biomechanical uncanny valley. I'm referring to the Crusaders' sack of Jerusalem in 1099. When we're talking about the absolute limits of the human psyche and the absolute extremity of human metabolic capacity, we find that the specific horror in Jerusalem is rooted in the gap between the fanatical will to kill of the Crusaders and the physical inability of their bodies and tools to even do it efficiently. These men had marched for 3 years from northern France across the Rhineland, across the Anatolian highlands and the Syrian deserts. By July 1099, they were starving, drinking from stagnant, corpse-fouled cisterns, ravaged by dysentery, and sunburned to the point of delirium. When the walls were breached on July 15th, the military structure evaporated. This was not the organized Roman shift system we talked about. This turned into psychotic religious frenzy, where fanatical and exhausted men who could barely lift their sword believed they were performing God's judgment on the unbelievers. What makes Jerusalem uniquely terrible to me is the tool degradation. A medieval iron broadsword actually relies on the weight of the blow rather than the sharpness of the edge. And to sever a limb or head, that takes a lot of kinetic energy. Within the first 2 hours of hacking through the dense crowds packed into Al-Aqsa and the narrow stone streets of the old city, these swords were finished. Chipped against bone, edges rolled and blunted, coated in thick layers of coagulating blood and human fat, making the grip slippery. The men wielding them were trembling from muscle fatigue, they were dehydrated, hallucinating, and still didn't stop. The result was days of intimate manual bludgeoning. Far from the clean death of a sharp blade, the sickening repeated crunches of blunt iron crushing collarbones, shattering skulls, and tearing muscle tissue apart rather than cutting it. If you were trapped in the compound on the second day, the man who you reached was not a soldier who was fulfilling his military objective. He was a weeping, shaking fanatic whose arms could no longer deliver a fatal blow, but whose religious convictions would never allow him to stop. You likely endured 3, 4, 5 glancing, agonizing strikes from something that resembled a heavy iron club rather than a sword. Raymond of Aguilers, who was there, wrote, "Men rode in blood up to their knees in bridle reins. Indeed, it was a just and splendid judgment of God that this place should be filled with the blood of unbelievers. Slurry of blood, bowels, and human fat." Join me for part 2.
It was Martin, Malcolm, Huey, Alvin, Marcus, Richard, Jesse, Adam, Carlin, Gordon, James, Philip, Nat. Showed them not to play with us. Duke, Langston, Thurgood, Robert, Hank, Jesse, Jackie, Muhammad, Paul, Stokely, Mega, Webb. About 3 Benjamins, a good 2 Freds. Women like Harriet, Rosa, Ida, Shirley, Sojourner, Madam, Maya, Mary, Bessa, Ella, and Retta. Even baby Ruby was out here applying pressure. Gail, John, Booker, Sid, George, you nuts if you don't know who he is. Bayard, Charles, Roy, Carter, Cecil, just for drinking them white folks' water. All kings and queens, yes, for real. Until the ones that we lost, like Emmett Till, and all those is here, we gon' continue to hold it down. Say it loud, black and
Free Sudan! Boycott diamonds and gold! Free Sudan! Boycott diamonds and gold! We most definitely cannot forget about the people of Sudan.
Thanks for watching Afro Think Tank. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And follow me on Substack and Patreon for more content. Remember, it's Pan-Africanism or nothing.